And in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, a man called George Parr was the patron of Duval County, Texas. His political machine rivaled New York's, and he and his team made sure Lyndon Johnson won the nomination for the Democratic nomination for the U.S. Senate. And I was a member of the family, so by marriage, and so I knew all these characters. Now, George Parr's political fooling around was just the background for this book. It's the catalyst, it's not the story. This is a coming of age based on a few truths and a lot of lies. And so I think, yeah, my disclaimer at the reads, this is a work of fiction, although some dialogue, characters, and incidents are based on historical records. The work as a whole is a product of the author's imagination. It starts out that people live longer down here if they keep their mouths shut. That's anonymous, yeah, for, I guess all good reasons, yeah. The Conmilenio, 1958. I was 14 when I learned to keep a secret. I should have stayed away from the Conmilenio, but it drew me like the moon draws the tide. Caballeros 100 years past camped at the outpost while they dipped cattle for ticks and castrated bull calves. And even though the ranch hands grinned above our heads, my best friend, Bert Charles, and I believed their stories about vaqueros calling spirits forward to dissolve their fears. Only then would the deserted bunkhouse accept the engravings of their names on stucco walls. We rode out with every intention of signing our names on its antiquated stone, but Bert Charles pulled up his horse. I'm not going any farther, Isabel Martin. You can make fun of me all you want to, I'm not going. He was already turning his horse back to the barn. Those stories sound scarier in Spanish. He called over his shoulder, managing to flaunt his fluency in the language while dignifying any qualms he had. Here in South Texas, he was easily identified as a gringo with his hazel eyes and light skin. And his smile, wide and genuine, robbed you of all misgivings. He tanned golden. Despite the fact that I was a gringa, I tanned the color of a wet pecan. Seeing my dark hair and eyes, most strangers who came up to the house let loose with a tornado of Spanish. I hated that. As Atlee Parr's niece, I saw myself as different from the local folks, special. I followed Bert Charles back that afternoon, but I had much to prove when I was 14. Even as a dark flower of premonition blossomed in my belly, I said, I'm going back there, Mr. With or Without You. Had I written my name that day, I would have not had to return, and that would have made all the difference. So the next 4th of July, 1st of April rather, April Fool's Day, she decides she's going out by herself and she's not allowed to ride out alone. So she sneaks out early in the morning, and she's going to go write her name, and she can hardly wait for Bert Charles to see it. It's written near Isabel Martin. So she gets out, but when she comes up, she overhears her uncle and his brother George having an argument. And there's some nasty words spoken. Her uncle hands his brother, Atlee hands George, a package and drives off and says, use it or not, I don't give a damn. And so she says, geez, I gotta get back. If they find out I'm out here, I'm in trouble. So she has to wait for George to leave, only he's not leaving. And so she sneaks up behind the car and and to see if he's gone to sleep. He's gotten so quiet. The sun climbed higher. I scuttled to the rear of the Chrysler where I braced myself, hands on my knees, and sucked air. When the panting stopped, I leaned out to the ridge of the fender. I took a chance and checked the rearview mirror. There he was, motionless, but not asleep. He stared out at the windmill. The bawling of an old cow and the repetitive chip of a cardinal chipped away at the silence. I imagined my mother shaking out the covers and putting out a search party. With my forefinger, I traced the letters spelling Imperial on the raised spare tire compartment and waited. A snap of the glove compartment and another click. At last, he would start the engine. George's eyes shifted over to the rearview mirror. He saw me. I knew he did. He'd tell I sneaked out. No other choice occurred to me. I must smile, come forward to be polite, say hello like I'd been taught, say I was just out messing around, and wondered, oh, was this your car? And tell him not to feel bad about Tio. He's quiet, you know. And if he was going to come over for breakfast, and if he would please mention he'd seen me. I'd been out looking for a surprise from Mother and Aunt Hilda. And did he know about the spirits in the Camerlenio? In the reflection of his side mirror, George's gray eyes pinned me to the rear fender. My repartee caught in my throat. I was sure whatever George had to say would change my life. With the truth about my uncle that would erase all hopes of Tio's innocence in George's election fraud. But there were no words. From the rearview mirror, a glint of steel sparked in the morning light, just a flicker. Searing into my face, his eyes lit the fevered burn of standing too close to fire. As though he were enlisting me as a co-conspirator, George put the pistol to his head. He pressed his lips together in a straight line, fine as a knife blade, depositing blame at my feet. Never taking his gaze off mine, he pulled the trigger. So that's how it starts. and she spends a great deal of time, and she's very fearful her uncle has given him a gun and has been involved in all this political intrigue, and she sets out to find the truth. Because in the 50s, nobody told kids anything. You know, they could be dying, and they would say, just a headache, don't worry. You know, it was a very different time where kids were protected to the point of insult. And so later in the book, toward the end, Izzy, her uncle has given her the loan of an old cow pony. And she's kind of insulted because she deserves so much more. she wants a white Arabian with flowers in his hair. And she gets this old cow pony mare. Well, this mare finally turns out, by surprise, accidentally turned out with the stallion, is going to foal. It was August, a hot night, before the foal was born. I watched it between contractions. The colt's head sank out of sight. With the sac ruptured, Tio said, his voice slow and measured, it's going to try to breathe, but there isn't enough room for his chest to expand. Better give her a hand. Tio lifted the stall latch and he slid in next to Canella, that's the horse. Now listen to me carefully. This is your coat, and I want you to be able to do this. Canella rolled her eyes around at us. I spoke as kindly as I could. It's okay, girl, we'll help. We'll help. But my voice shook, and without taking my eyes off the mare, I appealed to my uncle. What do I do? With the next contraction, I'll tell you when, you take both legs and help the foal get far enough out of the birth canal so it can breathe. We'll clear the sac away. Don't want the baby coming out in the birth canal if it's trying to breathe on its own. The little hooves pointed toward me, and I took hold. Like this? Like that. Just wait. Tio studied the mare's flanks. Now, he said. Now, pull. I caught my breath and leaned back and held on. The muzzle slipped forward. I held. Just a little more. We need a little more before the contraction ends. Tio reached around me and grasped the colt's forelegs. The scene fell into slow motion. The blood, its rusty odor, and the sweet, earthy smell of amniotic fluid, the ache and pull in my shoulders, the heat, my uncle's arms around me. There, she can handle it on her own now. Tio put his arm around me and pulled me away from the laboring mare. Canella stretched her forelegs and released the foal into the world. She rose to her feet and turned toward her baby. The umbilical cord broke as she stood. I glanced in panic at Tio. Oh, it's good, it's just like it's supposed to be. We're going to be invisible now. The next hour swam by in a haze. As Tio handled the afterbirth delivery, I stroked the dark, shining foal before me. He was a bay colt, all white stockings except for one black one. He's beautiful, isn't he, Tio? I ran my finger along his muzzle. Yes, yes he is, Isabel. Tio studied the foal. Keep the change, that's the sire. Throw some fine offspring. He gently lifted the foal's head and smiled. And this, he placed his fingers against a white smudge on the colt's forehead. This is called the thumbprint of God. Oh.
Wow.
A little bit mystery because we want to find out what Isabel has to find out, and a lot of coming-of-age self-discovery in a country where she is a gringa and she has to learn how to become a part of South Texas where most of the population speaks Spanish, and she comes to realize she's not the little prima donna she really thought she should be. My aunt, who is a character, I didn't use the real name until the last minute. I thought, everybody's dead. The bar name might sell, you know. So I used their real names. But I was visiting my aunt. It took me 8 years to write this. And I was visiting with my aunt, and I said, she had moved to Corpus, and she said, oh, I wish we had some figs. I love the figs out there. And I was anxious to go. It was about 80 miles from Corpus. And I said, oh, let's go. I'll drive you. And she says, you know, this time of year, the birds get the figs, and there's always a wasp in the fig tree. And so I go, ta-da! And so I named the ranch Rancho de las Higueras, which is Ranch of the Fig Trees. And so, you know, of course, the idea being behind when Isabel comes there after her father and mother split up, she thinks it's going to be perfect. And it is a luxurious place. But she comes to learn that there is a wasp among all this luxury. And she has to work her way through it. Any questions?
Is this your first book? You said it took 8 years to write?
Yeah, I'm slow.
No, I'm saying it's your first book. No, this particular book's the first book.
Yes, it's my first book. And it was one I've always wanted to write. This is a story I've always wanted to write, because all these, they're very dear to me. I grew up in this environment. And so I retired 13 years ago as a teacher after 30 years. And so I finally got to spend some time doing this.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not even sure what my question is, but okay, so it's historical fiction, based on facts, and you're part of the family. Oh, I just want to pick your brain. I want to ask you. And that's fascinating. And it has something to do with OBJ.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Dang, I'm gonna have to read the book.
All right.
I don't know my political history well enough, but how were they able to get that? I mean, it seemed obvious that there was a wasp in the fig tree there with Johnson's winning.
Yeah.
How did they get that past the state people?
Well, the state people looked into it. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was flagrant.
Yeah.
They had all the names, you know, from the graveyard. One little boy said, my daddy died and he came back to vote, but he didn't come to see me. Honestly. And they just, records, but all the names are signed to like all blue ink. I mean, they didn't bother. They just went right down the road. And it was just like, you know, I can do this and I'm gonna, and what are you gonna do about it? And so the state did investigate. But they were all, he was running against Coke Stevenson, another Democrat, and everybody had an axe to grind with everybody else. And George never let, you know, anybody get away with anything. It was payback. And that included the Claybirds of the King Ranch, that included Coke Stevenson. Anybody who ever crossed him, he got him. In person, he was just nice as pie. You know, the consummate politician. And yeah, I mean, I knew him pretty well. And, yeah, he was a bad boy.
What length of time does your book cover? Like how old is Isabella from beginning to end?
Oh, okay. It starts when she's 14, and then it goes part 1, part 2, part 3. And then the major part of it is when she comes first to the ranch, when she is about 10 years old. So a lot of it takes place then, and then toward the end it goes back to the current time. So it takes place over about 6 years.
Okay.
But of course I crammed down the history
Yeah.
because George was big and busy, you know, from the 30s till he committed suicide in 75. And at the ranch, well, not the Camerlenio, but, but so that was 40 years, and I did, oh, and people who know very much about the story goes, but that didn't happen that way. No, it didn't. It's all fiction. so, no, it didn't happen that way. But, yeah, and my uncle actually died before George committed suicide. So, do you have a question?
What's your next book?
My next book, and I can't think of a name, I was thinking maybe Goose Creek. Is kind of based on my great-grandmother coming from Missouri to Texas in right at 1900. And I'm about a third of the way through that, I guess.
Don't take 10 years on it, though.
I know, I'm doing better. I'm doing better. But yeah, and she has kind of an interesting story because the minute her husband died of TB, she takes all of her kids and heads to Texas. Just bingo. And I'm going, what? Well, then a few years later, after her sister dies, her brother-in-law shows up to marry her. So then I was thinking, well, I'd write a book for the kids, and I'm going, no. No, I'm going to make this good. So, yeah, it is really 99 and 9/10 fiction. But, so, yeah, I really, this was my goal. It was, and I'm going to close because I know it's got time to go. But I was a teacher at Lake Travis High School, and they said, okay, we want all our English teachers to go take a creative writing course. I'm going, that's the last 3 weeks of my summer vacation. Seriously, I just, you know, whined about that. And it changed my life. Because I wrote poetry, and it was short, you know. And, but somebody thought it was okay. And I thought, well, maybe I can write. And one of my Spanish professors in college, who never said a nice thing to me, I finally wrote a creative speech and story in Spanish. And he said, Mary Lynn, I didn't know you had it in you. And